Hello and welcome to the Inside the Birds pregame show. I'm Geoff Mosher alongside Adam Caplan, and joining us as always is Greg Cosell. We are into the NFL Divisional round. The Eagles will welcome the number 4 seed LA Rams to the link for a 3 o'clock kickoff on Sunday. The Eagles, of course, advanced by beating the Packers in the wild card round 22-10 last Sunday, while the Rams put forth a shocking 27-9 win over the Vikings on a Monday night game that was very interesting, very exciting. Folks, this one should be a good game, not only because it's the NFC Divisional round, not only because there's a lot of stars on the field, but Adam Caplan, Greg Cosell, we may have some elements take place as snow is expected for the game, during the game. And Adam, as we've known from 2013, sometimes you get a little more than you're thinking. Right now, the weather report is saying like it's going to snow, but you never know. It could be even worse.
Well, look, since we recorded our last show, our Friday morning show, the forecast has changed and it's worse. Mm-hmm. So it was supposed to be snowing during most of the game and up to an inch. Now we're looking at a minimum of 3 inches, starting at 1 p.m., by the way, Eastern, of course. The game's at 3 o'clock. And it looks like, it could snow the entire game. Right now it's supposed to. And we'll get into my conversation with a coach. I was able to track down a coach who was coaching for the Lions in that game, who gave me some great stuff. So we'll talk about that during this game. And it's interesting because that game, as you mentioned, it was so fascinating because I've never heard of a game where the opposing team didn't know, or the home team didn't know, that it was going to snow because it was not on the radar and it was never in the forecast. It was cold, but nobody knew that it was going to snow that day, but it did.
Well, guess who was the starting quarterback for the Detroit Lions that day that they lost badly to LaShawn McCoy and the Philadelphia Eagles?
Oh, Stafford had to be the quarterback. Yeah,
Matthew Stafford, who will be piloting the Rams today at the link in similar conditions, perhaps, maybe not as snowy, we'll see. And guess who was also on a roster that day when the Eagles played the Lions in a snowball game?
Yeah, I didn't know this, but the coach asked me that question. He goes, "Hey, guess who the inactive third quarterback was?" I was like, I don't know. I didn't say Orlovsky. See, I was going to say Orlovsky, but I didn't. I didn't know who it was. He goes, "Well, who'll be coaching this game?" I'm like, "Kellen Moore?" He goes, "Yep, that's the one." I was like, "Wow." And Sean Hill was the number 2 quarterback. So a lot has changed.
Well, you know what they say, the more things change, the more they stay the same, right? So let's, before we get into sort of breaking it down, I do want to have a discussion about the weather because we've seen a lot of NFL playoff games. In my most recent memory, I would think of, the Raiders versus the Patriots, the Tuck Rule game played in the driving snow. But Adam and Greg, I don't know, sometimes you think you know something and then you talk to more people and then more people and then more people, and then you don't know what to make of it. Because early on as a reporter, and I think Adam got the same information too, and maybe Greg yourself, when I talked to players and coaches, they would always say, if it's just snowing and the wind isn't bad, it's not a driving wind, that favors the passing game. So I was always under the impression that that's the case. And Adam and I talked about a game a few years ago where Tom Brady threw 6 touchdowns against the Titans in a driving snow. That would validate it. But I've also spoke to people recently, and Adam has too, and some of the feedback I got that it favors more the running backs, the ball carriers, and that if it's a slick ball, then if you don't have receivers who have good hands, then it doesn't favor the passing game. So I really don't know anymore. The more people I speak to, the more different opinions I get. And Adam, you said you spoke to someone who you think has a pretty good bead for this kind of thing. What kind of intel did you get?
So, first of all, from a player standpoint, you got to have the right cleats. And unlike the game that they played in 13 where nobody knew it was going to snow, well, yeah, the Lions didn't have quite the right cleats. So that was a problem. And this coach said that it really hurt their defense because Shady McCoy in that game, because of his running style, the defensive lineman in particular, it wasn't so much the linebackers. They could not get the right footing. And you know how Shady ran. He'd make that cut, and he had over 200 yards. And also what happened this game, I didn't even know this until I looked it up. There were 2 returns. There were Jeremy Ross was the returner for the Lions who had a punt and a kickoff return for a touchdown. It shows you big plays can happen because of the footing.
All right. So, Greg, maybe it's not necessarily passing game. It just could be offensive players getting the advantage over defensive players, as long as, Greg, the offensive players are sure-handed, ball-secure types. Now, we know that the Eagles have good pass catchers, and I don't think Saquon Barkley has shown any issues of fumbling this year. We know Jalen Hurts every once in a while will fumble, but that's sort of playing the quarterback position. The Rams, are they generally a ball-secure team? I mean, they are a ball-control team.
Yeah, and by the way, Jeff, I have no idea what the weather means for any of this. So,
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think any of us do. We're just speculating.
Right.
I don't know how that might change what the Rams or the Eagles might do. I think in the Eagles' case, they're probably going to play the way they always play. We mentioned that we've been waiting for them to take some deep shots. I think they would do that, I think, regardless of the weather. I mean, barring something dramatically changing, they're not going to be playing in a blizzard where there's going to be 6 or 7 inches of snow.
Right.
It might be snowing during the game, but, we'll see. We don't know the answer to that.
Sure.
I think the Rams, they're a running team. I don't think a lot of people think of them that way because of Matthew Stafford. But, at the end of the day, Kyren Williams only had 30 less carries than Saquon Barkley did this year. So, they're really kind of a run-first team as well.
Mm-hmm.
My guess is that from a passing standpoint, Stafford, he's just a great thrower of the football and an easy throw. I would think that it wouldn't be a factor for him. I don't know about Jalen, but I don't think it would be a factor for Matthew Stafford.
Gotcha. And we know that Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp are fairly sure-handed receivers. These guys are known for pretty much catching anything that gets in their direction. So that's probably
Cooper Kupp played at Eastern Washington. My guess is he may have played in snow before. I don't know.
Good point. Absolutely good point. And Saquon Barkley, he's only fumbled 2 times this year. Kyren Williams, 5 fumbles this year. Not big fumble numbers that sometimes you see out of guys who are less sure-handed. All right, so I just wanted to address the idea of the elements because it could play into the game, and I think we all agree. We just don't know how and who it would benefit.
Right.
Sure. Yeah. So let's get into the injury situation. Eagles are obviously going to be without Nakobe Dean. Adam, we all saw it. He got the rupture of the patellar tendon, and Vic Fangio said this week he's sort of forecasted without exactly saying it that he's going to have some kind of platoon with Oren Burks and Jeremiah Trotter Jr.
Yeah, I thought Greg had a really good point. It might have been with our Patreon group because I asked Greg, okay, let's go back to what your pre-draft tape study showed you about Dean versus Trotter, because I know Greg liked Trotter's tape better. The tape, this is what the tape told him. But one of the things Greg said, which I'd not heard anyone say, even Greg, I don't remember Greg saying this before, but he certainly said it earlier this week, that Trotter showed he could really cover. And so let's talk about that, Greg. If they had him in a nickel, what do you remember about his ability to move and cover?
Again, I just thought that he was a good cover player. I remember he had an interception return for a touchdown that I can kind of see. I forget who it was against, but I can kind of see the play. So I just thought that his tape was really good. I'm going back to my notes to see if because I actually watched him in 2022 and 2023 because it was the summer of 22, and I thought, gee, he might come out. So I ended up seeing him 2 years. And here's a note I made, for instance, in my 2023 tape study, I said, showed excellent awareness and underneath zone coverage, reading and feeling routes, and reading the quarterback's eyes. So, I thought that, and I also made the note, excellent blitzer, high-level athleticism, beating running backs with the lateral quickness and body control and burst. So I think in the past game, his college tape was really good. Nakobe Dean's had a great year. That's no knock on Nakobe Dean. He's played really, really well, and it's a shame that he can't continue this season. But I thought Jeremiah Trotter's college tape was good. I think in the times he's played this year, in week 18, and then I guess he didn't play many snaps last week, but I think he's looked good.
Greg, I can't help but think a little bit of TJ Edwards when you talk about Trotter Jr., only because they were both undersized. They were both quicker than they were fast. Neither of them tested extraordinarily well. And both of them were known for really having a good football IQ. TJ Edwards got better and better and better until 2022 when he had a great season and signed that big contract with the Bears. Is it fair to see some similarities there?
Yeah, it's funny you say that because in my transition, one of the last points I made is I said, is there a TJ Edwards comparison to be made? And then I said, Trotter is a better prospect than Nakobe Dean when he came out of Georgia a few years ago. And I started by saying that Trotter was a fascinating evaluation, and you could easily make the argument that his tape in 2023 was the best of any linebacker in the 2024 draft class. But we all know why he was a 5th-round pick.
Right. Size, speed, all that stuff. That always comes into play big time with the linebackers. All right, so we'll see. We'll see what kind of platoon, if one happens. And as I said to Adam earlier, maybe Vic is looking to see just how good Trotter is, and if they go on into the end, win the game and get to the NFC Championship, does he feel comfortable playing Trotter for the entire game? Because most coordinators don't like to have rotating linebackers like that, unless it's a part of what they do, like the Steelers.
Normally, right.
Yeah, normally, you'd like to stick with one guy or another. As for the other Eagles injuries, pretty good. Only one guy out, and that is Byron Young, who unfortunately we will not get to see Byron Young active for both teams, since the Rams have one as well. But that's okay. Dallas Goedert had an illness throughout the week, but he's expected to go. So all looks good on the Eagles front, whether you're talking about A.J. Brown in the knee, which, I don't know, for those who didn't catch our shows earlier this week, Greg, you felt watching the tape that you could see maybe
on one play it stood out. I don't want to have people think that, man, the guy couldn't play.
Yeah.
Right. It was just one play where I felt like, man, he's not really stretching that out. Now, again, I don't want to put any ulterior motive on that play. It just didn't look like him running.
Right. And look, we know he's been honest about it. He said his knee has been bothering him, but we know he's been out there playing every snap. And when the ball is thrown his way, he's generally catching it. The one thing I wanted to ask you really in particular, though, Greg, is does he run? Is it stand out? Does he run as many deeper routes as he has been when he's healthy? Do you think his routes?
No, I haven't seen as many deeper routes. So whether that's a function of him, whether that's a function of other things, we don't know the answer to that.
All right. Good stuff. That's it there. Adam, Rams injuries. Man, the Rams had a scare, right, with Tyler Higbee, their tight end.
Oh, yeah.
In the game against the Vikings. Tell everybody what happened there.
Yeah, so he was sent to the hospital because when you have internal bleeding, you're going to the hospital. That's just the way it is in the NFL. They need to figure out what it was. They got it under control. It was just a chest contusion, thankfully, because you're worried about lung, chest, and it turned out to be a contusion, which is a bruise, by the way, for people who don't know. So anyway, they took care of that within 24 hours, and he's expected to play. The only player they're a little bit concerned about is Akilla Witherspoon, is one of their outside corners. We'll have more from Greg and some information we got him from coach we spoke with. But that's it. They're in pretty good shape here. But Tyler Higbee, the shame of that is that he was killing the Vikings in the first quarter, Jeff. I don't know if you watched. Like, it seemed like every other play they were going to him. And he looked like the old Tyler Higbee, because remember, he tore his ACL in week 18 last year, and it took him a while to get back, and now he's finally healthy. And we know what he did 4 years ago against the Eagles, or 3 years ago, whatever it was.
Yeah, definitely. I remember that game. I was there. He ate.
It's interesting you mentioned Higbee. He got hurt relatively early the other night, correct?
Yep, he did. Yeah, he had 4 catches for maybe 49 within the first quarter. Yes.
But what was so fascinating about that game was the Rams' personnel foundation versus the Vikings was totally different from what they had done pretty much all season. They had been one of the highest percentage 11 personnel offenses in the league. 82% of their offensive snaps had been out of 11 personnel through the regular season, the second highest percentage in the league. Against the Vikings, even when they lost Higbee, which was relatively early, they played at a 12 personnel, a significant, 51% of their offensive snaps against the Vikings came out of 12 personnel. So the question is, was that a specific game plan versus the Vikings, or is this something that we might see against the Eagles? And obviously they're not going to tell us, so we don't know the answer, but just wanted to throw that out, because as soon as I started watching that tape, I'm like, wow, there's a lot of tight ends playing, and the Rams rarely ever do that.
Well, by the way, so Kupp played only 29 snaps in that game. Okay. On Greg's point, Colby Parkinson, who was their wide tight end, he was there. He played the most. He played 62% of snaps. At Hunter Long, you might remember him from Miami, he had 42% of the snaps. And this kid, Davis Allen, who I know they play sometimes in 12 personnel, he played 36% of the snaps. So, yeah, wow, that's not like them. But
yeah, that's
interesting.
So we don't know the answer, Jeff.
Yep.
But that was totally different from what they had done. Not only this regular season, but the way Sean McVay has played. You know, he's been an 11 personnel coach.
Yeah. So I would have, I mean, that's a really good question. The Vikings blitz a whole lot more than the Eagles historically.
And they play all those pressure fronts, which the Eagles don't really do much of at all.
Right. So, yeah, that'll be very interesting to see what kind of approach they take against the Eagles. And the only other guy, you know, obviously their cornerback, Ahkello Witherspoon, a little banged up. So if he's out there today, Adam, you got to think that you try to test a guy that you know has been, you know, nursing some injury, especially if it's a thigh injury. You know, if his lower legs aren't great, you want to try to test that.
Yeah, it's actually a hamstring. Yeah, they do list it as thigh, but it's hamstring.
Yeah.
So and I know Greg said he was going to have some stuff on this, so obviously we want to get his tape study notes. So I talked to a coach who game plan against the Rams this season. He said very simply throughout the week we were going to go after the corners.
Yeah.
I'm not going to use the words that he used, but I'm just going to translate the information. He felt that they could. He said they could. Greg, he said he felt they could win.
Yeah,
I'll leave it at that. And they did, by the way, and I'm going to leave it at that. But they just felt that they didn't have a quality starting quarter. They thought they were very average, competitive, though he did say they're feisty. But he said, you know what? They're not explosive. They're very beatable. And he goes, not that we couldn't run the ball. We thought we can go after those corners. So, Greg, what are your thoughts on those corners?
I agree. And keep one thing in mind is they've been rotating 3 corners on the outside. And when you're rotating 3 corners on the outside, you're basically saying that we don't feel we have one guy that is really good enough. So it's been Williams. And it's funny you mentioned feisty competitive because Williams is clearly that guy, but he's just not a great corner. And then it's been Witherspoon and Durant. And so they've been rotating those 3 at outside corner. Durant also plays in the slot at times. Yeah, they have 3 corners that they rotate. That is to me, and it just echoes what the coach told you, that to me is the weakness of their defense. And for the most part, it's a very good defense, but I think that's the weakness.
All right.
Jeff, by the way, real quick, and the Eagles got them in that game. A.J. Brown crushed them in that first game. The Eagles only threw the ball 22 times, but Brown had over 100 yards, so that plays to what Greg just said.
So let me ask 2 questions then. We'll invite this discussion here as we talk about the Eagles offense against the Rams defense.
Playoffs? We're talking about playoffs? You bet we are. Get in on the action at DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL. Scoring touchdowns is the key to winning in the playoffs, and you can score big by betting on them at DraftKings, the #1 place to bet touchdowns. Ready to place your first bet? Try betting on something simple, like a player to score 6. Go to the DraftKings Sportsbook app and make your pick. The lines are already up on DraftKings. The Eagles 4.5-point favorites against the Packers. Lines and odds are subject to change. New DraftKings customers can bet $5 to $200 in bonus bets instantly. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use the code BIRDSPREGAME. That's code BIRDSPREGAME, all one word, for new customers to get $200 in bonus bets instantly when you bet just $5. Only on DraftKings Sportsbook. The crown is yours. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. In New York, call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369. In Connecticut, help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org. Please play responsibly. On behalf of Boot Hill Casino and Resort, 21 plus age and eligibility varies by jurisdiction. Void in Ontario. Bonus bets expire 168 hours after issuance. For additional terms and responsible gaming resources, see dkng.co/audio.
One, the Rams corners did not just become this way overnight. They've been playing with these corners for quite a while. But if you look at the Rams' win-loss schedule, I mean, they were 8-2 down the stretch. So they've won games. And not only do they win games, outside of the Bills game that they won in the 40s, they did not give up a whole lot of points. I know they didn't play the best teams, but the last 4 or 5 games, the opponents have like 9, 6, 12. So, Greg, how have they been able to compete? I'm sure every team has said, we're going to go in there and attack the corners, and then didn't succeed. So why haven't they succeeded?
Well, you have to protect. And they have, when they go to their pass rush front, over the last 2 months, you can make the argument that their pass rush front, and that front has Kobe Turner and Braden Fisk inside, and it has Young and Jared Verse outside, you could make the argument over the last 2 months that particular group is been the best pass rush front in the NFL.
Wow.
And teams have really struggled. Look, I imagine most people saw the wild card game last week when they played the Vikings, and the Vikings do not have a very good O-line, and that's a discussion that we'll have about the Eagles O-line versus the Rams O-line, and they obviously played. And for instance, Jared Verse was not a big factor in that game, but for the most part, you watch tape of the Rams pass rush front, and they control people, they dominate people, and they've been as good as any in the league over the last couple of months.
Have to call that, Adam, good coaching. I mean, certainly there's talent. Fisk and Verse were, Verse was a first-round pick, Fisk a second-round pick, but they've also gotten really good contributions out of guys like Byron Young, who was not a first-round pick, and Kobe Turner.
Well, they're part of that pass rush front, yeah. And they stun a ton, by the way. They're a really high percentage stunt defensive front. So besides the fact that all those guys can win one-on-one, they stun an awful lot.
And don't forget, Geoff, Kobe Turner had a really good rookie season. Like, he's a really good football player.
He's a good player.
Now, let me ask you this, Greg, off of what you just said. The word I got was that and this obviously playing the Eagles because they have arguably the NFL's biggest offensive line, they sometimes have trouble because they're small, usually small front. Have you noticed that they've had some problems?
Well, that's why Fisk doesn't play in their quote unquote run front.
Okay.
And sometimes Young and Verse do not play in their run fronts because they have a lot of personnel. They play Michael Hoyt quite a bit. Inside, when they're in their run front, they play Brown. They play Tyler Davis, the rookie from Clemson, who's a good run defender. There's one other name I'm missing, but that they play. Gallimore, it might be. Gallimore plays in their run front. So Fisk normally doesn't play in their run front, so which raises the question of how the Eagles will line up with their personnel. Will they line up with 12 personnel and get the run front on the field, or will they line up in 11? That's one of the questions in this game. Now, perhaps weather could be a factor in determining that. We don't know.
The Eagles have this strange habit sometimes, and I'm not questioning it. I'm just noticed it, that they come out for the first drive in 12 personnel. I think last week against the Packers, not only some 12, but also some 21, right? Because they had the fullback on the field, or fullback on the field for one snap. And then by the second series, they're back to 11, and then they go to 11 for pretty much most of the game. Sometimes they've come back to 12 later in the game. I can't figure it out, but it does seem that they go to 12 to start a game quite often. Do you notice that, Greg?
Yeah, I think they do. Again, and there's obviously a reason. We don't know it. That's all part of the process that they go through the week when they game plan. And obviously they feel it's important to do that, and that it gives them some information that they want to get. So we'll see what they do this. Look, every team wants to start fast. There's always a balance between starting fast and then gaining information from the defense that you're playing against. So, it's easy to say, gee, let's go down and score a touchdown. Every team obviously wants that. But they also want to feel like they're learning something about the opponent that either validates the study they've done all week or shows something different that then the coaches upstairs, because they're charting, there's 10 coaches doing all kinds of charting that they then relay down to the appropriate person. Or if it's Vic Fangio, he's obviously upstairs, but Kellen Moore's on the field. So they relay down to Kellen Moore, and, then he has that information.
And then obviously when the Eagles see that there's a front that has a lot of run personnel versus pass personnel,
right,
that's when they like to go no huddle, which they've done advantageously all year long to keep the opponent, the defense, from being able to substitute some of those pass rushing personnel on the field. So, Adam, I would expect some no huddle, some up tempo from the Eagles. I mean, I know we thought that they would be aggressive last year as well. Yeah. They weren't as much, but last week. But I would expect that this week.
Yeah, look, Jalen likes it. I mean, most quarterbacks do, but Jalen in particular, man, he sometimes when they go no huddle, man, you can go back to the Green Bay game, the first one in week 1, and how they moved it going faster. So yeah, I would agree with that. There are a lot of subplots to this game. I think things have changed a little bit. I mean, we know it starts with a run with both teams, but the Devontae Smith, by the way, did not play in the first game. Rob Havenstein, the right tackle, didn't play in that first game. Greg just talked about how much better their pass rushers gotten. BG went off in that game. That was a game he got hurt. I mean, he was unstoppable in that first half. One of our favorite players on the show now, going back 3 years, Milt Williams had 2 sacks in that game. We should have made the Pro Bowl, by the way. It's another story for another time. So he really should have. But anyway,
never heard of him. Who does he play for?
Exactly. Well, no, the funny thing is, I said this on Mike Gill show on Friday. The national media has no idea who number 93 is, Milton Williams. But this guy right there wearing that Tommy Bahama shirt put us on. Give him credit. We're going to have to give you credit for that one. But what I got to ask you about Milton Williams is, now I know as Bill Polian told us, you cannot grade the jersey, grade the player.
Of course.
But a lot of people get stuck with that about competition. But
yeah,
you know that, Greg. Yeah. You know that very well. So what the heck did you see from Milt Williams? I know our friend Fran Duffy liked him too. You told that story.
Well,
what did you like so much
about
him?
What year did he come out?
21.
All right, I'm gonna look at my. I mean, I don't remember.
This is his 4th year. His deal expires after the season.
Okay, I'm gonna look him up right now and see what I said.
Okay, I'm just curious.
Yeah, I can't. I mean, that was a ways back.
But I gotta. And Howie, look, Howie, remember the argument, the debate.
Oh, here's what I said.
With him and Tom Towers.
All right. I said Williams is one of the most interesting D-line prospects in the 2021 NFL draft, given his strong combination of traits that will be tempered. It's funny, I'm saying this based on what you just said. That will be tempered by many by his lesser level of college competition, because he went to Louisiana Tech. I said Williams is a smooth, fluid athlete with natural quickness and agility and change of direction, who lined up in different D-line positions at Louisiana Tech and has extensive experience as a versatile, multi-positional player. What consistently stood out watching Williams' tape was how strong a run defender he was, with excellent leverage and hand usage to control and displace O-linemen while maintaining his balance to find the ball. The questions as you transition him to the NFL result from his lesser weight, if you see him as a D tackle, and his lack of his sudden twitch. But, I said my sense is he could develop into a 4-3 D end who could move inside and sub fronts and rush the quarterback. So that's what I just read is what I thought of him coming out. So I'm not surprised based on watching his tape and my evaluation of him as to what he's become.
He's become very important to the Eagles defense. I just want to finish off offense on one other note. I could, listen, it just stands out to me. It's not a data-based observation, more tape. Teams that have performed well defensively against the Eagles seem to have pretty good linebacker tandems. The Packers have good ones. Edgerrin Cooper is a good linebacker. The other guy they put out there is pretty good as well. And, Washington's got 2 really good linebackers. They've given the Eagles some problems at times. I look at this and I'm talking about inside linebackers, Greg.
Sure, stack players.
Yeah, I look at this Rams group, and I'm going to be the first to admit I don't know much about them, but they certainly don't jump out maybe as household names like some other.
Well, they're not household names, but they've played well because basically – obviously it depends on the defense they put out there, but the guys who have been playing the most are Roseboom and
him I remember. Yeah.
Right. And Spates. Okay. Number 48. Now, the wild card in this whole group is Michael Hoyt because he plays multiple positions for them. He lines up on the ball as an edge pass rusher. He'll line up inside, standing up, and he'll line up off the ball as a stack backer. But it's really Roseboom and Spates with Hoyt being a factor as well. I think based on tape that Roseboom's played well. Now, again, I'm not charting every play, so I'm not sitting here saying, he should have been a Pro Bowl player. I can't say that. Like I said, I'm not charting every play, but he shows up on film. And Spates has too, because the player who was playing earlier in the season, I guess he's done for the year, was Troy Reeder, who's been around the league. And he got hurt, and like I said, I guess he's done for the year.
Well, actually, he started practicing Friday. I'd be shocked if he's available because you just talked. He's missed almost the entire season.
Yeah, so it's going to be Roseboom and Spates and Hoyt, depending on how they. Now it'll depend on the Eagles, their personnel. Now it becomes situational football.
And I'm sure gang tackling or swarming or whatever you want to talk about, it has been a big point of emphasis for the Rams. Like you said, not the biggest group, so they got to make sure they have multiple guys around the ball.
And I'll tell you this, and again, because we're on the East Coast and obviously the Rams are on the West Coast, so maybe people listening who are Eagles fans or who live on the East Coast are not that familiar with the Rams, but Quentin Lake is a really, really good football player. You know, he essentially plays safety and slot corner. He's kind of a hybrid. He'll play in the box at times. He'll be an overhang player. He'll play on the back end. He's a really, really good player who rarely ever comes off the field.
Interesting. And by the way, last week Durant had kind of a big game, right? Didn't they use him as a blitzer?
Well, he played both. They played two dimes, really. See, sometimes they play Jalen McCullough as the dime safety, and he's done really, really well. They've become a heavy dime team as their sub defense. Well, here, let me walk through this only because they do a lot of things.
Cool.
Their foundational defense has become big nickel. Now, again, they may go 5-2 front against the Eagles, depending on who the Eagles put out there, because of the run game element with Barkley. But they play a ton of big nickel. And in that, Lake is essentially kind of a safety hybrid slot in the big nickel. Okay. And when I say slot, he's not playing necessarily a wide receiver, but just where he lines up. And they play Lake, they play Cam Curl, and they play the rookie Cam Kitchens. Those are the three safeties they play in the big nickel. Okay. But then when they go dime, and they played about 25% of their snaps in dime this year, high percentage, maybe second or third in the league, that's where they sort of have two dime packages. One has Durant and Lake inside with Witherspoon and Williams on the outside, and the other has Jalen McCullough, who plays kind of, he's a safety, but he lines up all over. So they play a lot of personnel. They play a lot of different packages.
That's interesting because that makes them theoretically tougher to prepare for, because you got to spend time in practice going through each and every one of those packages and what you want to do against not only the players, but also the look itself
and what they do out of those packages. Right. And again, I hope that wasn't confusing, because I know people are not necessarily studying the Rams in detail, but that's what they do.
Interesting stuff. All right. So I think that's the big part, Adam, is that's a lot that a team has to prepare for in less than a week.
It is. And the cool thing is you talk about Michael Hoyt, or Hecht, however you say it. He went to Brown University, okay? You don't see a lot of Brown players from the Ivy League playing in the National Football League.
Definitely.
But Chris Shula has done a great job. Like, I know there's some people around the league who are like, okay, we went to college with Sean McVay. Let's see how good of a coach he is. They have a really interesting defense. Greg just talked about it. A Cardinal Lake son, Quentin Lake, who's been, Greg just outlined, I mean, a son of a very good football player. So it's been a good story. I would still be worried if I'm the Rams about the size of the Eagles' offensive line and what they were able to do in that first game, because they ran all over them. I mean, Saquon Barkley had 2 runs of 70 and 72 yards.
Yeah.
Which we were all blown away by. And I remember that text I sent to you. I'm like, what else could he do? And he did it. I mean, this is one of those games. And the Eagles' foundation is clearly a run. So we know it's coming.
Well, and keep in mind that, Jared Verse generated just 1 pass rush pressure on 19 pass rushes against the Eagles. Right. So, and he's been phenomenal. He's been just dominating, and he did not against the Eagles.
Hey, Jeff, one thing I do want to add about that coach who told me, he said they want to come out throwing against the Rams. He said the worst thing you can do against that team is get behind the sticks. He goes, because they're so fast.
Yeah.
That was one concern that they had coming into the game. It did show up a little bit because they got behind. Sometimes they were 3rd down and long, and they're like, okay, we know what's coming. So, but again, the Eagles have one of the 2 best offensive lines of football. You don't really worry about it too much.
Yeah, but I almost feel like it calls for, you're going to set the table from the start with the run game and then get into your pass game, as opposed to vice versa.
You're talking about the Eagles?
Yes, Eagles.
Yeah,
it would be smart to stay ahead.
Yes, of course you want to stay at 6. But I'll tell you what, and I'd have to look it up. What was the game where they shocked us? Not last week, they didn't work, but on like a 3rd and 11, and they nailed it. It might have been that game. I can't remember, but where they felt
they ran for the first down on 3rd and 11.
No, the Eagles did. I think the Eagles might have done. There was a game where the Eagles ran it on 3rd and 11. I was shocked, and they got the first down.
That's what I said. They've done it a couple of times this year. They're not afraid to run on 3rd and
which is interesting, man.
Yeah,
very interesting.
I thought it was the Giants actually, but so maybe that doesn't.
I don't remember
against the Giants, but either way, they are not afraid to run on 3rd and medium to 3rd to long, because they figure even if they don't get the first down, they're only 1, 2, or 3 yards away from it on 4th, and
they're going for it.
Yeah, they're a true 4-down offense, which has been totally to their advantage for quite a while now. All right, defensively, I think the big part, because we keep looking back at the Week 12 game, and Adam, you mentioned this as one of the biggest changes for the better for the Rams, is that their right tackle is no longer Warren McClendon, right? And on the opposite side, the guy who gave McClendon so much trouble in that Rams game was Brandon Graham, who was having one of the best games of the year, if not career, against the Rams, and he got hurt in that game and has been out for the season with the triceps ever since. So that is a big part of why that game looked the way it did, that you can't just translate into this game.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, now we'll see. But the story, though, has been Nolan Smith. He is. No one saw this coming. It's like, it's not quite to the level of Zach Bond, but if you understand that, it wasn't even a debate leading into training camp, leading into the season. BG wasn't just ahead, Jeff, on the depth chart because it's BG. He's a veteran player and a proven player. It's because Nolan Smith didn't beat him out. That's what happened.
Right.
So, and what you should know is that Nolan Smith, before BG got hurt, it was kind of, it started to become even in snap count, closer to when BG got hurt. And then, as you know, Bryce Huff had his surgery, and Nolan is just taken off. And the thing, Greg, that I throw it back to you is, now you tell me if I'm wrong. He's been a little bit more physical than I anticipated. I'm a little surprised. He's been really good in a lot of areas.
I feel like that who's ever coaching him it's working because he's now playing with his hands a lot better. And the key thing for him when he plays with his hands is to make sure he can keep his feet clean, because ultimately he's an athlete and, he's not necessarily a hand fighter, but you have to use your hands in this league. You can't just run around people. So he's done a really good job of extending and keeping his feet clean and then being able to play off that. And he's a very smart, savvy player. You can see that in particular in his run defense.
Yeah, he also, by the way, this got lost because, you'd have to be looking for it. He had a really good tackle in kickoff coverage. So when you start to go through the checklist of last week's games, pass rush, check, run defense, check, special teams, check. It was one of his better all-around games. And so now he's the one who's going to line up over the right tackle. But this time, Greg, the right tackle is Havenstein, if I pronounce that correctly.
Yeah.
How do you see that matchup? How do you see Havenstein as he compares to McClendon?
Well, Havenstein's been doing this a long time. He's a big right tackle. He's one of those old Wisconsin tackles. Those guys are sprinkled throughout the league. A lot of Wisconsin O-linemen. Because before they made their coaching change a few years ago, they were a run team, a lot of physical guys. So Havenstein is not necessarily a great athlete, but he's big. He's hard to get around. But you can beat him because he's a little stiff in his core. He's always been that way. That's just who he is. But we'll see. It's Smith has played really, really well. I'm just fascinated to see how the Rams come out and how they play in this game and how they feel they can attack this Eagles defense. That's what most interests me. And and whether they're going to play with 2 tight ends or whether they're going to go back and play with 11 personnel. I'm very curious about that. I think your point's probably right, Jeff. My sense is, just a sense, because we don't know, that they probably specifically went 12 because of the Vikings and all those pressure fronts, because the Vikings line up more than any team in the league with 6- and 7-man fronts. Now, the Eagles will on occasion, as we know, but that's not really their MO.
Greg, why is Cooper Kupp? We know he's been injured, but when you watch the tape on him, why is he just not a guy who's catching as many passes?
I wish I had a brilliant answer for that, Jeff. Clearly Nakua has become the foundation of their pass game. And you could even argue that DeMarcus Robinson has surpassed Kupp in the way they run their pass game. So I can't answer that. I just don't know. Unless Kupp has injuries that just prevent him from being what he was, because there was a 2-3 year stretch where Cooper Kupp was just, if you wanted to look at a wide receiver and say, that's the way you play wide receiver in the NFL, you would have looked to Cooper Kupp. And no one was saying he's more physically gifted than Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase, but just the way in which he played the position.
Is there anyone that routinely they use to try to take the top off a defense? Because it seems like they have a glaring lack of a true, other than Tutu Atwell, who's very small.
And doesn't play that many snaps, depending on anymore.
Right. So how are they able to score? They scored 40-something points against Buffalo. How do they put points on the board without a true over-the-top type of guy?
it's schematic, and when Stafford is on, he can make throws that he's still, if he's on and he's comfortable, he is still as good a thrower as there is in the National Football League. Mm-hmm. So they do it schematically, which a lot of teams do. I mean, even the Lions have speed because Jamison Williams clearly is one of the few in the league that has terrifying speed, but you can do that with scheme. And that's how they do it. And Stafford, by the way, is really good at the line of scrimmage. He's seen everything. So there are times he checks or audibles when he sees something, and a big play can happen.
Right. Adam, I'm going to be the first to admit that I was a Kyren Williams skeptic going into this year. He doesn't have great size. He doesn't have great speed. No. And we know that Rams, running backs carry the ball a lot. So I figured by week 4 that he was going to be toast, but he has had an unbelievable second year. And this is the foundation of their offense.
Yeah, and look, Blake Corum broke his forearm, so they can't go to him. Mm-hmm. It's they got Ronnie Rivers. We remember his dad Ron for the Broncos a couple decades ago with Mike Shanahan. But yeah, this situation is fascinating because talking to scouting people who scouted Notre Dame, they saw him as a backup. They didn't see this. Mm-hmm. It's a fascinating story. When you talk to personnel people, nobody really liked him to be a starter. I didn't talk to one person before or after the draft who saw him as a starter, but Sean McVay, by the way, he likes, like these Shanahan people, disciples, they like to use one back pretty much exclusively. Or like Williams will get a breather a couple times a game, but not for very long. Now, I will say in that first matchup, that fumble he had inside the 5-yard line, that was a game changer.
It was.
That absolutely changed the game.
Well, it's funny because I was in the same camp as pretty much every other scout and personnel person about Kyren Williams. I mean, Kyren Williams, to me, the way I saw him is I think he's a very good runner in terms of knowing how to run, but I didn't see him, and I'll explain that in a sec what I mean by that, but I didn't see him as having the traits to be a feature back in the league. The physical traits, the athletic traits.
Sure.
And when I say he knew how to run, and this shows up now in the league, and he's very good, he's very good at understanding defensive fronts. He's very good at understanding what I call gap fluidity, meaning how fronts change once the ball is snapped, because obviously people don't stay in the same spot. And he's really good at understanding defensive flow and reading it. So he's a very professional runner who just doesn't have, great physical athletic traits, which is why you don't see him with long breakaway runs. He's a sustaining back. He did have a 27-yard run in the first possession against the Eagles week 12, but that's, those are few and far between for him.
Hey, Greg, it's important to note, I want your observations on the style with which they run, because for a lot of people still associate a McVay coach team with outside zone or stretch zone, wide zone, but haven't they changed lately? Aren't they much more of an inside and, duo? And
duo is their foundational run with Kyren Williams. And again, I know I mentioned this earlier in the week that we don't know if they did that because of Williams or if McVay just felt like, hey, it's time to change, because of the way the league's going, maybe defenses. But duo is their number one run. And duo, so people understand what that means, is it means that there's 2 double teams inside. Okay, so you're theoretically what would happen is they'd be doubling Carter and either Jordan Davis or Milton Williams, depending on who the Eagles or Ojoma, whoever the Eagles have at D tackle, you'd be doubling them, and then you ideally push them so you're then working up to the stacked backers. So that's called duo. Now they still run outside zone. It's not as if they've abandoned it, but duo has become much more of their foundational run.
And that's why I would think, never know, 11 personnel would make sense for them, not having Jordan Davis on the field. Cooper DeJean is out there, but then you get the 4-man Eagles front, and you get to put double teams on both Carter and Milton Williams.
Right.
That may not work because both of those guys are good, but you don't have to worry about that extra D lineman, especially a 340-pound one there, and then leaving somebody else with one blocker like Milton Williams in that case. And so it just changes your blocking scheme a little.
And the other issue, too, is because McVay's so good, it'll be interesting to see if he adds in some wrinkles. I mean, I've always felt that angle blocks like trap, wham, those kinds of run concepts are really effective against 4-man penetrating defensive lines, which is what the Eagles are, particularly not so much when Jordan Davis is in the game, but if they have Williams or Ajomo in the game, because it's a good way to deal with Carter. And when I say deal with, I don't mean that you're going to shut him down. He can't play. But I mean, he's a penetrator. He's not sitting and waiting to see what happens. He wants to go.
Right. Big matchup there with Avila, the left guard, right? He plays left guard, I think.
Avila is the left guard. Dotson's the right guard. The rookie from Arkansas, Bo Limmer, is the center.
Yeah, so that's a big matchup on that interior defensive line. And remember, if those guys can, and again, like you said, duo, they're trying to push those guys back with your offensive line as much as possible. Now you don't have Nakobe Dean coming downhill.
Right.
You've got.
And he's a really good gap shooter. That was a strength of his game.
Yep.
But this is a game where, for Williams and the Rams, if he can get 4 or 5 yards on first down, that's really good. It might not seem like a lot watching the game, but that's really good.
Yeah. So a really interesting cat and mouse. And Adam, I think Stafford is always the wild card. Like Greg said, I think if it's snowing and it's hard to throw, then that's an advantage for the Eagles.
That's a different issue.
Yeah. But in general, if this guy completes like 5 or 6 in a row and you start to see him get warm and really get his rhythm going, you're in trouble because he is playing it like anybody.
Adam knows this. He is one of the most respected, not only quarterbacks, but players in the league. I mean, he is thought of incredibly highly, and deservedly so.
It's interesting because, for many years with the Lions, there was some frustration throwing off platform because he thought he can do it. He needed talking to Lions coaches who work with him. He needed to grow up a little bit. He had to understand, you know what? You're very talented, but you don't always have to do that. He still throws off platform. We know that. But there's some throws you go, why did you do that? He would just do some things to frustrate coaches, but you move along, you mature as a quarterback. He's a Super Bowl winner, by the way. What's interesting, Jeff? If you look back at that trade, the Lions-Rams trade, I think both teams won that trade. Two things can be right.
Sure.
Both teams worked out really well. Jared Goff is a heck of a quarterback. He didn't end well with the Rams. Sean McVay didn't want him, but boy, the Lions have benefited from it. And look at Matthew Stafford. He was able to take his career to another level.
Yeah, I think there are 2 things that happened in there. Is that the throw-in, Jared Goff, wound up really developing for the Lions, and the picks, the absence of first-round picks, but the extra picks that the Rams got in lower rounds, they hit home runs on with
he did very well.
with Nakua and Byron Young and all the other guys that they're playing right now.
But the bottom line point for this game, assuming whether again we don't know, let's assume they can play, is you have to be able to get pressure on him, and if you do, he will throw it up, because he's an aggressive player. I mean, he's, and he will throw it up. And I guarantee the Eagles are talking about the fact that, hey, let's pressure this guy and he's going to throw some to us. There's no question that's being talked about in the Eagles defensive meetings, because that's the way they talk about these guys, tips and overthrows, that's what you want. And we can then, make some picks. But if he's comfortable in the pocket, he can throw it as well or better than anybody in the league.
All right, let's wrap this up. We'll get into our player of the game and our predictions. You should know the Eagles have been for most of the week 6-point favorites, according to our friends at DraftKings. I believe, Adam, the over-under has moved a little bit because of the weather in it. And listen, as the DraftKings will always remind you, lines and odds are subject to change, and that may be the case depending on what happens when kickoff and what's coming out of the sky, if anything at all. So that'll be interesting to see. But I feel like 6-point is a pretty fair number for this matchup. Do you agree on that? Why don't we go straight with you?
Yeah, honestly, look, I know the first game went up being a blowout, but it wasn't like that early. The second half, obviously, Barkley took over and they rolled.
Well, the first play of the third quarter, he ran 70 yards for a touchdown.
Exactly, right. That
kind of changed the whole game.
Yeah, exactly.
And by the way, I'm breaking that play down in the matchup show.
Nice.
But I'm not doing any self-promotion there. Just wanted to mention that.
No, hey, we're happy to throw that in. And we know hey, we used to do this with you. Do you know what the times of the shows are, or any idea?
I never know that because for a lot of people, it's just you press the blue button thing.
That's what I do. Yeah, I just watch it whenever I want to watch it.
Yeah, exactly.
We won't miss it. You and Darius Butler. Is Sal going to be there, or you have
out there? Yeah.
Right.
Sal is. I know Coley Harvey fills in for him when he's unable to be there. But,
yeah.
Okay, so Jeff, the over/under totals dropped from 45.5 to 43.5. Now, what's funny is, Jeff, that Lions game which we referenced, it wasn't like the passing numbers were very good in 2013 for that game.
Yep.
I think it was December 8th, if I'm not mistaken. Let me just double check.
I think you're right. I think you hit
it. It was December 8th, 2013. There were 54 points scored, but the passing numbers were terrible. It was just those crazy 2 special teams returns for the Lions.
Right.
Shady went off.
Mm-hmm.
You know also, and the guy who scored their last touchdown was Chris Polk. Chris Polk.
That's amazing. See, that to me signals that ball carriers have the advantage. Maybe not be passing, maybe just 2 returns and good running back who can cut back. Ball carriers have an advantage. And guess what? Both of these teams have some good ball carriers. So
and again, I don't know if this means anything, but Kyron Williams obviously played at Notre Dame where it's not necessarily balmy in December.
Cold weather.
So, I mean, he's played in cold weather.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay.
All right, so Adam, what's your pick?
All right, I've got it. Eagles 23, Rams 13. You know, I'm Mr. Under, so I've got a low-scoring game. I know some snow games could be higher scoring, but you saw last week Eagles played a low-scoring game. Still won. Defense was incredible. The Eagles' defense has been incredible. I'm a little bit concerned from going from Nakobe Dean to the 2 other guys, but Eagles still clearly the better team, and you saw what happened in the first game. The offensive line absolutely destroyed them.
Yes, absolutely. So who is your player of the game?
Oh, boy. Player of the game. Player of the game. The guy has been playing lights out, and it's going to be Nolan Smith.
Wow.
You know, I always love it when you got a defensive player. That's
good. And I had Dallas Goedert last week, and you couldn't. I don't know who you could have given it to after the game because Nolan played very well. Goddard had the He-Man play of the game.
Yeah, you nailed it, by the way. You predicted Dallas Goedert not only to be the player of the game, but you predicted a touchdown for Dallas Goedert. So your football knowledge is amazing.
Hey, Greg, real quick, what does he mean to them? Could you give the folks an idea of what he
Dallas
means?
Goedert?
Yes, 88.
I mean, first of all, I think he's a great player, and I just think the way the Eagles have played offense over the last number of years, he certainly doesn't put up the numbers some other tight ends. But I think he's a top 5 tight end in the game. And it's funny, a play like that. Obviously, that was just the He-Man play, as you said. But their pass game creates a lot of those quick throws for him. Okay, and he's really good run after catch. And I don't know if people think of him that way, but I mean, that's. This is not an offense that throws a lot of, seam balls in the middle of the field. So he doesn't get those opportunities, which, if he did in the context of an offense, we'd see way more from him because he's really, I think he's a great football player.
Jeff, real quick, Tyler Higbee, one of the things about him is, number 89, by the way, you'll see these screens. Like he does those tunnel screens. He's phenomenal at them. He's a really big-time athlete. Who was it? Western Kentucky, Greg?
Western Kentucky, and he was a split player. He never lined up attached to the tackle.
Right. He was a big-time athlete. Then he became a very good blocker. So So again, to send it back to you, I got Nolan Smith. Is he? What number is he? 0 or 2?
3.
3. I kind of was 1, 2, or 3. Yeah. Number 3, Nolan Smith out of Georgia.
All right, Greg. Who wins? Who's the player of the game?
Well, my player of the game is going to be Saquon, and that might not be a profound thing, but I think it's going to be run-based regardless of the weather. And I think they're good. They're going to run the football, and I think they'll be successful doing it because I don't think the Rams will score enough points where the Eagles will have to step away from the way in which they play. So I think Saquon is going to have 25-plus carries in this game, and eventually he's going to break something. Might not be 270-yarders, but he's going to break something. And I think turnovers are always a hard thing, so you can't predict that. But I think let's assume for the moment it's a clean game. It probably won't be, but you never know. I'm going to go Eagles 24, Rams 17.
All right. It'll once again be a clean sweep for the Philadelphia Eagles. I am predicting a 28-14 victory. Zach Bond will be the player of the game. Double-digit tackles, probably force a turnover or 2. And I think in the post-game show, we're going to be talking about his effort a lot.
Real quick, in that game in 2013, the Lions had 7 fumbles. Stafford had 5 of them.
Wow.
Okay. Just want to point. I just saw that because I was wondering because Greg talked about it. He said it. He made me think about, okay, were there any turnovers? Well, there were. Yeah, Stafford had 5, lost 1, and Joyke Bell lost both of his fumbles. There you go.
Good old love that name. Blast from the past. All right. That's going to do it for the Inside the Birds pregame show. Of course, stay tuned after the game. Adam Caplan and myself, we will do Inside the Birds post-game live and have it all wrapped up. And maybe the Eagles will be off to the NFC Championship. So for Greg Cosell and Adam Caplan, I'm Geoff Mosher. Thanks for watching.